What this wounded gray being revealed to me about love, heartbreak, and Jesus' true teachings will shatter everything you thought you knew about healing a broken heart. Before this story ends, you'll understand why your prayers for relief from pain haven't worked, why church told you to just have faith when your world was falling apart, and you'll discover that the love you've been desperately seeking has always existed within you, waiting to be awakened. If you're ready to hear truths about Jesus that no pastor ever taught, truths that will transform your understanding of love from human emotion to divine technology, subscribe to Stories of Light and activate the bell. Because what happened to Frank Morrison in a small Pennsylvania grocery store in 1976 will reveal abilities within yourself that can heal any wound, overcome any loss, and reconnect you to the infinite love that Jesus came to demonstrate. Now, let me tell you how it all began.
November 14th, 1976, 11:47 p.m. I remember the exact time because I'd just locked the front door of Morrison's Market, the small grocery store I'd inherited from my father in Countersport, Pennsylvania. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as I counted the register for the third time, trying to make the numbers match, trying to keep my mind occupied with anything other than the empty house waiting for me. The night shift had become my refuge. Fewer customers meant fewer sympathetic looks, fewer whispered conversations that stopped when I walked by. 3 months since Margaret had left, and the whole town still treated me like I might shatter at any moment. Maybe they were right. I was reaching for my coat when I saw it through the back window, a streak of brilliant blue-white light cutting across the November sky, silent as a falling star, but moving wrong. Too slow, too controlled, the not controlled at all. The light veered sharply, wobbled, and dropped behind the tree line maybe 200 yards past the store's loading dock. No explosion, no sound, just an eerie silence that made my chest tight. Probably a meteor, I said aloud to no one, my voice echoing in the empty store, but my hands were already reaching for the flashlight we kept under the counter. Something pulled me toward that light. Curiosity, maybe, or just the desperate need for any distraction from the thoughts that had been circling my mind like vultures for months. The night shift air bit through my jacket as I crossed the parking lot. My breath came out in clouds. The loading dock light barely reached the tree line, and beyond that was just Pennsylvania darkness and the sound of wind through bare branches. I should have gone home. Instead, I clicked on the flashlight and walked into the woods. The beam caught something metallic about 50 yards in. Not the dull gray of a crashed plane or the rusted brown of old farm equipment. This was different. Smooth, seamless, reflecting light in colors that seemed to shift as I moved. Silver one moment, deep blue the next, then something like mother of pearl. My heart hammered against my ribs. The craft, because that's what it was, God help me, a craft, was maybe 15 feet across, curved like two dishes pressed together, with a surface that seemed to drink in the flashlight beam and give back something stranger. One side was crumpled, pushed in like someone had struck it with a cosmic fist. And there, lying in the dead leaves 10 feet from the craft, was something that made my knees buckle. A being. Small, maybe 4 feet tall, with skin the color of moonlight on water. The head was disproportionately large, dominated by eyes that were closed now, almond-shaped and taking up nearly half the face. The body was thin, almost fragile-looking, wearing something that might have been clothing or might have been part of the skin itself. I couldn't tell. One arm was bent at an angle that made my stomach turn. "Jesus Christ," I whispered. I stood frozen, every rational thought screaming at me to run, call someone, do anything except stand there staring at something that couldn't possibly exist. But I couldn't move, couldn't look away. Then the eyes opened. Not gradually, just suddenly open. Large and black and endless as the space between stars. No white, no iris, just depthless black that should have been terrifying but somehow wasn't. Those eyes looked at me, into me, through me, and I felt something I hadn't felt in 3 months. I felt seen. The being didn't speak, its mouth never moved, but words appeared in my mind, clear as if someone had spoken them directly into my thoughts. "Please, I am injured. Will you help me?" The voice, if you could call it that, was neither male nor female, carrying a quality of profound gentleness that reminded me of how Margaret used to speak when I would wake from nightmares. Margaret. The thought of her name sent the familiar spike of pain through my chest. The being's head tilted slightly, those impossible eyes studying me. "You are in great pain. I can feel it. Emotional trauma. Recent." I should have been shocked that this creature could read my feelings. Instead, tears burned my eyes. Here I was, standing in the Pennsylvania woods at midnight, crying in front of an alien, and somehow it felt less humiliating than crying alone in my empty house. "Yes," I said, my voice cracking. "Yes, I'm in pain, and yes, I'll help you." I didn't know why I agreed. Maybe because this being, this impossible thing that shouldn't exist, had acknowledged my pain when everyone else tried to pretend it away. Maybe because I was so tired of being alone that even an alien was better company than my own thoughts. Or maybe because some part of me, the part that I'd been trying to silence with work and television and sleeping pills, recognized that this moment, this encounter, was the answer to prayers I'd been too angry to admit I was still praying. I moved closer, carefully, my hands shaking. The being tried to stand, faltered, and I caught it. Him, with surprising ease. He weighed almost nothing. His skin cool and smooth under my hands, not quite like anything I'd ever touched before. "The craft," he transmitted into my mind. "I must retrieve something before we go." Together we stumbled to the damaged ship. He touched a section that looked no different from any other, and a panel irised open. Inside lights pulsed in colors I had no names for. He reached in with his good arm and withdrew something that looked like a crystal, small enough to fit in my palm, glowing with soft amber light. "For later, when you are ready to learn." I asked no questions. Questions belong to the rational world, and I had just stepped out of that world completely. With the being leaning against me and the crystal in my pocket, we made our way back through the woods, across the loading dock, and into the back storage room of Morrison's Market. I locked the door behind us.
Frank Morrison had been a cashier at Morrison's Market for 23 years, ever since graduating high school in 1953. Not exactly the life he'd imagined for himself, but then, life rarely matches the dreams of 18-year-olds. The store had been his father's, and his grandfather's before that. 3 generations of Morrisons standing behind that same counter, scanning groceries, making change, knowing everyone in town by name, and knowing their business even better. In Countersport, Pennsylvania, population 2,800, the grocery store was the heartbeat of town life. Births announced over the deli counter, deaths mourned between the produce and the canned goods. Frank had planned to leave once, 1954, right after his father died. He'd had acceptance to Penn State, was going to study engineering, build bridges, see something beyond the Allegheny Mountains that ringed their small town like walls. But his mother had looked at him with those tired eyes, and he'd understood without words that she couldn't run the store alone. So he'd stayed. And then he'd met Margaret. She'd moved to town in 1956, a young teacher assigned to Countersport Elementary, fresh from Philadelphia, with city sophistication and ideas that made the locals raise their eyebrows. She shopped at Morrison's market every Tuesday after school, and Frank had spent 6 months working up the courage to do more than nod politely. Their first real conversation had been about soup, Campbell's versus store brand, and somehow it had turned into dinner, then a movie, then 20 years of marriage that Frank had thought would last forever. Margaret was everything Frank wasn't. Bold where he was cautious, adventurous where he was content, always pushing him to want more, be more, see more. She'd taught him about art and music and books he'd never have picked up on his own. She'd painted their small house in colors that made neighbors talk. She'd planted a garden full of flowers that served no practical purpose except beauty. She'd made him believe that staying in Countersport didn't mean settling for less. For 2 decades, Frank had been happy in a way he hadn't known possible. Not ecstatic, Margaret would have called that unrealistic, but deeply, quietly content. He'd wake before dawn to open the store, she'd leave for school, and they'd meet back home for dinner she'd cooked while telling him about her students. On Sundays, they'd attend Potter County Community Church, sitting in the same pew his family had occupied for 3 generations. Frank had prayed every Sunday, dutiful, routine prayers of gratitude and request. He believed in God the way most people in Countersport believed, quietly, traditionally, without too many uncomfortable questions. Jesus was the Son of God who died for sins, and if you followed the rules and attended church and tried to be good, you'd go to heaven. It was simple, comforting, safe. Until August 12, 1976, when Margaret had sat across from him at their dinner table and said, "Frank, I can't do this anymore." The words hadn't made sense at first. He'd thought she meant dinner or the gardening or some specific task that had overwhelmed her. But then he'd seen her face, not angry, not even sad exactly, just resolved in a way that made his stomach drop. "I need more than this," she'd said. "More than Countersport, more than the market, more than us." She'd met someone, a man from Pittsburgh who'd been visiting his parents for the summer, someone who could give her excitement, adventure, a life beyond their small town and their small routines. "It's not your fault, Frank," Margaret had said, and Frank had wanted to scream at the cliché, at the terrible kindness in her voice. "You're a good man, Frank. You're content with this, and I'm not. I'm 42 years old and I feel like I'm disappearing." She'd left 2 weeks later. The divorce papers had arrived in September. Frank had signed them without reading them fully, feeling like he was signing away his own death certificate. The church had been worse than useless. Pastor Williams had offered platitudes about God's plan and forgiveness and moving forward. Sister Barbara had brought casseroles in sympathy that felt more like pity. The congregation had whispered, quietly, charitably, maddeningly, about Margaret's crisis and Frank's situation. No one said what Frank knew they were thinking, that he'd failed as a husband, that he'd been too boring, too predictable, too small for a woman like Margaret. He'd prayed every night for the pain to stop, kneeling beside his bed like a child, begging God to take away the crushing weight in his chest, to help him understand why this had happened, to show him how to survive the empty house and the empty bed and the empty future stretching endlessly ahead. The silence from heaven had been absolute. "Have faith," Pastor Williams had said. "Trust God's timing." But faith felt like holding water in your hands.
No matter how tightly you gripped it, it slipped through your fingers. At 48, Frank felt ancient, too old to start over, too young to give up. He'd stopped attending Sunday services after a month, couldn't bear another well-meaning prayer circle where people touched his shoulder and promised that God was working everything for good. What good could come from loneliness that made every breath hurt? The night shifts had started in October. More money, fewer people, and blessed silence, where no one asked how he was doing with false brightness in their voices. Just Frank, and the empty aisles, and the fluorescent lights, and the clock ticking toward dawn. He'd stopped praying entirely 2 weeks before the encounter. Not out of anger. Frank wasn't capable of that kind of dramatic rebellion. He'd just stopped. Stopped believing that anyone was listening. Stopped believing that it mattered. The house Margaret had filled with color felt like a tomb now. Frank couldn't bring himself to change anything. Her paintings still on the walls, her books on the shelves, her teacups in the cabinet. It was like living in a museum dedicated to his own failure. His mother had been dead for 5 years. His father for 22. He had no children. Margaret had never wanted them, and Frank had never pushed. His sister lived in Ohio with her own family, sending Christmas cards with photos of children he barely knew. At night, lying in bed alone, Frank would stare at the ceiling and wonder what the point of any of it had been. 20 years of marriage reduced to empty rooms and signed papers. 48 years of life amounting to a small-town grocery store and a reputation for quiet competence. He'd followed all the rules, been a good son, a faithful husband, a reliable employee, a regular churchgoer. He'd asked little and complained less, and he'd ended up alone anyway, with no answers, no comfort, and no hope that anything would ever feel different. "Is this all there is?" he'd asked the darkness the night before the encounter. Not praying, just asking the question out loud because the silence in his head was worse than the silence of the empty house. And then, the next night, a light had fallen from the sky.
I laid the being carefully on a nest of empty shipping boxes in the storage room, my hands still trembling. The overhead bulb cast harsh shadows, making the gray skin look even more alien, more impossible. The arm hung at that awful angle, clearly broken, and there was a dark mark on the left side of the rib cage that looked like a burn. "I don't know how to help you," I said, my voice too loud in the small space. "I'm not a doctor. I'm just a cashier," the being completed, the words appearing in my mind with gentle humor. "Yes, but you have compassion. That is more important than medical knowledge." I laughed, a short, bitter sound. "Compassion? I don't even know what that means anymore." "You could have run. You could have called authorities who would have dissected me, studied me, kept me in laboratories for the remainder of my existence. Instead, you asked if I needed help. That is compassion." I knelt beside him, my knees cracking. Up close, I could see that the skin wasn't uniformly gray, but had subtle variations, silver at the joints, darker around the eyes, almost luminous at the fingertips. The eyes themselves were extraordinary, reflective as mirrors, showing me my own face distorted and strange. "What's your name?" I asked. "The closest translation in your language would be Zahiel." The being, Zahiel, tried to sit up and gasped, a sound that didn't come from his mouth, but somehow resonated in my chest. "The arm requires realignment.
The burn is less serious.
I can't set bones. I'll hurt you.
You cannot hurt me more than I am already hurt, and I will guide you. I hesitated, then nodded. My hands moved to his arm, surprisingly cool under my touch, and I felt him flinch. There is medical tape in your facility, Zahiel. I sensed it. Aisle 7, with the bandages. How did you... Go, please. I stumbled through the darkened store, my flashlight beam bouncing off stacked cans and cereal boxes. Aisle 7. I grabbed the first aid kit we kept for minor customer injuries, then paused by the pharmacy counter and added aspirin, bandages, and antiseptic. When I returned, Zahiel was examining his arm with those large eyes, tilting his head in a way that reminded me of a bird studying something curious. You must pull here, he indicated a spot just below the elbow with his good hand, while I push from above. When you feel the bone align, you will know. I can't. You can. You have set your own broken bones before. I see the memory. He was right. 20 years ago, a bad fall from a ladder while restocking top shelves. I'd snapped my wrist, and too stubborn to close the store for a hospital visit, I'd aligned it myself and wrapped it tight. Margaret had been furious when she had found out, had dragged me to the emergency room, where the doctor had grudgingly admitted I'd done a decent job. Margaret. The thought of her brought the familiar ache. I feel your pain, Zahiel said softly. It radiates from you like heat. The woman who left, you loved her deeply. Tears blurred my vision. Please don't talk about that. Forgive me, but understand, I did not crash here by accident. I came with purpose, and part of that purpose involves you, Frank Morrison. Your pain, your questions, your prayers that you think went unanswered. My chest tightened. How do you know about my prayers? Later. First, please, the arm. I took a breath and gripped where he'd indicated. His skin was smooth, almost slippery, and I could feel the displaced bone underneath. On his silent count, I pulled while he pushed, and felt the sickening sensation of things moving back into place. Zahiel's entire body went rigid, but no sound came from him. I worked quickly then, wrapping the arm with tape and splinting it with cardboard from a shipping box. The burn on his ribs I cleaned gently with antiseptic, surprised when it seemed to bubble and foam as if reacting to the medicine. That will help, Zahiel confirmed. Your healing compounds work differently than ours, but they work. When I finished, I sat back, exhausted. Now what? Now we talk about why I'm here, about what you need to know, about the one you call Jesus. My chest tightened. What does Jesus have to do with any of this? Those infinite eyes looked at me with something that might have been compassion or might have been pity. Everything, Zahiel said. Jesus has everything to do with this, with me, with why your prayers seemed unanswered, with your wife left, with why you feel broken beyond repair, and with what you're about to learn. I wanted to argue, to refuse, to demand practical answers instead of spiritual ones. But I was so tired of fighting, so tired of the pain, so tired of feeling alone. Okay, I whispered. Tell me. Zale shifted slightly, adjusting his splinted arm. The movement sent shadows dancing across the storage room walls. For 3 months, you have been praying for relief from the pain of your wife's departure, he began, the words clear and calm in my mind. You have begged your God to take away the loneliness, to help you understand, to restore what was broken, and you have heard only silence. This silence has led you to believe that God does not care, or perhaps does not exist. Am I correct? I swallowed hard. Yes? You are praying incorrectly. The bluntness shocked me. Excuse me? For 20 years, you attended your religious services and absorbed a teaching that is fundamentally flawed. You were taught to pray as a supplicant, to beg an external deity for favors, to plead your case like a peasant before a king, to hope that perhaps you have been good enough to deserve what you ask for. That's how prayer works, I said, defensive despite myself. You ask God for help. No. Zale's eyes seemed to deepen, to pull me into their darkness. That is not how the man you call Jesus taught prayer to work. What you are doing is operating from a frequency of lack. You pray, please take away my pain, and in that very prayer you reinforce that you are in pain, that you are separated from wholeness, that you are powerless to change your state. I am powerless, I said, and hated how my voice cracked. I can't make Margaret love me. I can't fix what's broken. You cannot make anyone love you. This is true. Love cannot be forced or manipulated. But you are not powerless over your own experience of love, your own frequency of love, your own connection to the infinite source of love that flows through all things. I shook my head. I don't understand. Because you have been taught incorrectly. Let me share the first truth. God is not external to you. God is not up there somewhere, judging whether you have prayed correctly or behaved well enough. God, the infinite consciousness that creates and sustains all things, is within you, has always been within you. That's, I searched for the word, heresy. God is separate from us. That's basic theology. It is theology designed to maintain institutional control, Zale said, not unkindly. When Jesus said, "The kingdom of God is within you," he meant this literally, not metaphorically, not poetically, literally. The divine creative force exists at the core of every conscious being. You are not separate from God, Frank. You are God, experiencing itself through the lens of your unique perspective. My mouth felt dry. That can't be right. Why not? Because I'm nothing. I'm a middle-aged cashier in a dying town who couldn't even keep his wife happy. If I was God, I wouldn't be suffering, Zale completed. This is the second truth you need to understand. You chose this experience. Before you incarnated into this physical form, you, as consciousness, reviewed various life options and selected the one that would provide optimal growth opportunities. You chose the lessons, including the painful ones. No, I stood up abruptly, anger flaring hot in my chest. No, no one would choose this. This pain it's unbearable. Why would anyone choose to suffer like this? Because suffering is not the tragedy you have been taught it is. Suffering is the friction that polishes consciousness. It is the pressure that transforms carbon into diamond. You chose to experience deep love and then its loss, because only through that experience could you learn what I am here to teach you. Which is what? Zale's eyes held mine. The love you are desperately seeking from Margaret, from any external source, is a pale shadow of the love that already exists within you. Jesus came to this planet to demonstrate this truth, that love is not an emotion you feel toward another person. Love is the fundamental frequency of creation itself.
and you have the ability to generate it, channel it, and transform reality through it. That's insane. Is it? Tell me, Frank, when you were with Margaret, in the moments when everything felt perfect, where did that feeling of love exist? In her or in you? I opened my mouth to answer, then stopped. Both? No, the feeling of love existed in you. Margaret's presence, her actions, her words, these were triggers that allowed you to access a love frequency that was always available within yourself. She did not give you love. She gave you permission to feel the love you are capable of generating. My legs felt weak. I sat back down on a shipping box. This is why your prayers have not worked. You have been praying, God, please bring Margaret back so I can feel love again. But this prayer assumes love comes from Margaret. It does not. It never did. Love is the creative force that Jesus mastered and came to teach humanity to master. When he healed the sick, fed the multitudes, calmed storms, he was not performing supernatural miracles. He was applying consciousness technology that every human being possesses, but few have learned to activate. Consciousness technology? The words felt strange in my mind. Yes, Jesus understood that thoughts and emotions are not mere mental events. They are energetic frequencies that interact and shape physical reality. When he said, "As a man thinketh in his heart, so is he," he was providing technical instruction. Your thoughts, especially when powered by emotion, are creative forces. I thought of the 3 months I'd spent obsessing over Margaret's absence, replaying every moment, torturing myself with what-ifs and if-onlys. So I've been creating more of what I don't want? Precisely. Every thought of loss reinforces loss. Every emotion of abandonment attracts more situations that make you feel abandoned. Not as punishment, but as law. Consciousness creates experience. This is what Jesus came to demonstrate and what institutional religion has spent 2 millennia obscuring.
This is a breakdown, I said, my voice shaking. I'm hallucinating. The stress, Margaret leaving, being alone too much, I finally cracked. I'm sitting in my storage room, talking to nothing, and tomorrow they'll find me and... Touch my arm, Zale interrupted calmly. I reached out, felt the cool reality of his skin, the ridges of the tape I'd wrapped. Hallucinations do not have physical presence, he said. Your mind is protecting itself from information that challenges your fundamental beliefs about reality. This is natural. But I am here. I am real. And what I am teaching you is true. I stood, pacing the small room. Even if you're real, and I'm not saying you are, this contradicts everything the Bible teaches. We're sinners, separated from God by sin. That's why Jesus had to die, to bridge the gap. We can't just access God ourselves. That's the whole point of salvation. And who taught you this interpretation of Scripture? Zale asked. The church, pastors, 2,000 years of theology. 2,000 years of institutional power structure that benefits from keeping humans dependent on external authority. Frank, if what I'm teaching is demonic deception, as I suspect you're thinking, ask yourself, what do I gain? Am I telling you to hurt others? To serve me? To abandon morality? No. I am teaching you that you have power, that you have divine connection, that you can heal yourself. If these teachings lead to love, compassion, and empowerment, how can they be evil? I had no answer. The church has studied these things for centuries. Scholars, theologians, people way smarter than me have interpreted these texts. Who are you to say they're all wrong?
I am not saying they are wrong. I am saying they are incomplete. The historical Jesus taught radical empowerment. You will do greater works than I have done. The kingdom of God is within you. I and the Father are one. These are not statements of unique divine status. They are invitations for humanity to recognize its own divinity. But empowered people do not need institutional control, do not pay tithes for salvation, do not submit to religious authority. So the church, not from malice, but from its own human limitations, transformed empowerment teachings into dependency doctrines. If I believe this, my voice dropped to a whisper. What does that make me? A heretic? A fool? I've spent 48 years believing one thing. I've raised on these teachings. What do I tell people? How do I face Pastor Williams, the congregation? You tell them nothing until you have lived the truth yourself, Zael said gently. Transformation is not about belief, it is about experience. I am not asking you to change your beliefs, Frank. I am inviting you to try different techniques and observe the results. Science, not faith. Tears burned my eyes. Why me? Why would you crash here, in this nowhere town, for a nobody cashier? I'm nothing special. I'm not smart or spiritual or... Jesus did not choose the religious elite of his time. He chose fishermen, tax collectors, prostitutes. He chose the broken, the humble, the wounded, not despite their wounds, but because of them. The broken are open, the hurt are humble, the lonely are receptive. Your pain has made you ready, Frank. That is why. 20 years, I choked out. 20 years I prayed wrong. 20 years I went to church and learned wrong and believed wrong. Margaret and I, we prayed together. We asked God to bless our marriage. If this is all true, if I'd known then what you're telling me now, maybe I could have, maybe we'd still... Guilt is another frequency that imprisons you, Zael said softly. You cannot change the past. You can only choose differently now. Every moment is a new opportunity to align with truth. The dam broke. She didn't even say goodbye, I sobbed. 20 years, and she left a note. A note, Zael, like I was someone she barely knew. And I prayed and prayed for God to bring her back, to change her mind, to make her love me again. And nothing. Silence. Like I didn't matter. Like our marriage didn't matter. Like I was nothing. I collapsed against the shelving, my whole body shaking. And now you're telling me that God was there the whole time? That I could have fixed this? That I had the power all along and just didn't know? How am I supposed to live with that? Zael was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice, his transmission, was filled with a tenderness that made me cry harder. Margaret left not because you failed, but because her soul had different lessons to learn. You cannot keep someone whose growth requires them to leave. This is not rejection of your worth. It is honoring of her path. And Frank, Margaret does not have to love you for you to access love. The love you seek is not in any person. It is in you. It has always been in you. And once you learn to generate it yourself, you will discover that it is more powerful, more fulfilling, more transformative than any love another person could give you. I don't believe you. I know, but I can show you, if you're willing to try. Will you let me demonstrate what Jesus demonstrated? Will you let me prove that love is not emotion, but technology? Will you trust me enough to experiment? I looked at this impossible being, this wounded alien in my storage room, offering me truths that terrified me and promises I desperately wanted to believe. Yes, I finally said. Show me.
Stand, Zael said. I obeyed, wiping my eyes. I am going to tell you things about your physical condition that I could not possibly know unless what I'm teaching is true, that consciousness extends beyond the physical form and can perceive energy patterns in other beings. His eyes seemed to scan me, moving from head to toe. Your left knee has chronic inflammation from an injury approximately 12 years ago. You twisted it carrying heavy boxes upstairs. The pain increases with weather changes, particularly cold and damp. Your lower back has 3 compressed discs from decades of standing. There is a small scar on your right hand, between thumb and forefinger, from a knife accident when you were 16, cutting vegetables. You have recurring tension headaches that originate at the base of your skull, and your heart, he paused, your heart has a slight arrhythmia, stress-induced, that developed after Margaret left. It feels like skipped beats, makes you briefly dizzy. My mouth fell open. Every single thing was accurate, including details I'd never told anyone, the knife scar I'd hidden from my parents, the skipped heartbeats I'd been too afraid to mention to a doctor. How? Every physical condition creates a distinct energy signature. Jesus perceived these signatures. That is how he knew what was wrong with people before they spoke. It is not supernatural. It is developed sensitivity to energy fields that exist whether you perceive them or not. Go to your produce section, Zeal instructed. Bring me a plant that is dying. Confused, I walked through the dark store to the small section where we sold potted plants. Most were healthy, but in the back, scheduled to be thrown away, was a wilted African violet, brown at the edges, drooping and lifeless. I brought it back. Place it here. Zeal indicated the floor beside him. He extended his good hand over the plant, not touching, just hovering about 6 inches above. He closed his eyes, and I felt something change in the room, a subtle shift in pressure, temperature, something I had no words for. Watch, he transmitted. At first, nothing happened. Then, so gradually I thought I was imagining it, color began returning to the leaves. The brown edges receded, the drooping stems straightened, as if someone was pulling them up with invisible strings. Over 15 minutes, I watched a dying plant become vibrant and alive. This should take weeks, I breathed. Proper watering, sunlight, time. Directed consciousness energy accelerates natural healing processes. The plant's cellular structure remembers health. I simply reminded it and provided energetic support for rapid reorganization. Jesus used identical principles on human tissue, but with far greater mastery. I touched a leaf. It was supple, healthy, real. Find me rice, Zeal said, a small amount in a bowl. I brought back a measuring cup of white rice, poured it into a plastic bowl from the deli section, maybe half a cup total. Study the grains if you wish, or at least observe carefully how much is there. I studied it. The rice came about halfway up the small bowl. Zeal placed his hand over the bowl. This time I could feel the energy more clearly, a warmth that emanated from him, a tingling in the air like static electricity before a storm. The rice began to multiply. New grains appeared at the edges, then throughout, as if materializing from nothing. It happened slowly, no magic flash, no sudden transformation, just gradual accumulation of matter where there had been less matter before. When Zeal removed his hand, the bowl was full to the brim. "This violates physics," I said, my voice shaking. "Matter can't be created from nothing. Conservation of energy, basic thermodynamics." "Matter is consciousness vibrating at a slow frequency. When you understand the relationship between thought and form, when you can hold a vision with sufficient clarity and power, molecular reorganization becomes possible. This is how Jesus multiplied loaves and fishes, not by magic, but by understanding creation at its fundamental level. "Now it's your turn," Zeal said. "My turn?" "Your right hand. Paper cut, fresh from this morning, small but stinging. Between your index and middle finger." He was right. I'd gotten it opening a cardboard box, hadn't bothered with a bandage. "I'm going to guide you through healing it, right now, in minutes instead of days." "That's impossible. You said the same about the plant. Please, trust the process." Following his instructions, I focused on the cut. Zeal taught me to visualize not what was wrong, but what was right, to see the skin already whole, already healed, to feel gratitude for perfect tissue as if it already existed. Now, focus on love, not emotional love, energetic love. The frequency of wholeness, of perfection, of divine order. Breathe it in, imagine it as golden light flowing into your hand. I felt ridiculous, but I tried. And I felt warmth, actual physical warmth concentrating in my hand at the site of the cut. The stinging faded, the warmth intensified. When Zeal told me to look, the cut was gone. Not healed over with a scab, but gone. The skin smooth and unbroken as if the injury never occurred. I stared at my hand, turned it over, flexed my fingers. I did that? You activated principles Jesus taught. You accessed the creative power within you. This capacity exists in every human. He came to demonstrate that you don't need external saviors when you can access universal healing forces directly. Think of someone you know who is suffering, someone with chronic pain or illness. I thought of Helen Mercer, who came into the store every week, hobbling with arthritis so severe her hands were gnarled and swollen. She'd been a pianist once, had taught music at the same school where Margaret worked. Now she could barely hold a pencil. Hold her in your mind, Zeal said. Visualize her clearly. Now, we are going to send healing energy across distance. You will do most of the work. I will simply amplify what you generate. For 20 minutes, Zeal guided me through the process, imagining Helen whole and healthy, generating feelings of compassion and love, visualizing golden light flowing from my heart toward her wherever she was. It felt strange, absurd, impossible. When you see her next, ask about her hands, Zeal said. Do not tell her what we did, simply observe.
3 days later, Helen came into the store. She was carrying her grocery basket herself, not pushing it with her hip as usual. And when she handed me her credit card, I saw her fingers, still elderly, still age-marked, but not twisted, not swollen. She flexed them with visible joy. Frank, you won't believe it. 3 nights ago, I woke up and the pain was just gone, completely gone. The doctor says my inflammation markers dropped to normal ranges overnight. He's calling it spontaneous remission. I'm calling it a miracle. I rang up her groceries with shaking hands. Jesus sent healing across distances constantly, Zale had told me. Physical proximity is not required when working with consciousness energy. Intention transcends space. Standing in my store, watching Helen walk out without pain for the first time in years, I could no longer deny what I'd witnessed. These abilities were real, which meant everything Zale was teaching me about Jesus, about love, about human potential, all of it was true.
Over the next 4 days, while Zeal's ship remained hidden in the woods and his injuries slowly healed, he taught me truths that shattered and rebuilt my understanding of everything. The consciousness you know as Jesus had evolved far beyond need for physical incarnation, Zeal explained on the second night. He was what we call a master teacher, a being who had completed evolution cycles across multiple worlds and dimensions. He chose to descend from higher frequency existence to assist humanity at a critical point in its development. So he wasn't God's only son? He was God's son in the same way you are God's son. All consciousness originates from the same source. Jesus' statement, "I and the Father are one," was not a claim of unique divinity. It was an invitation for humanity to recognize the same truth about themselves. He was demonstrating human potential, not divine exception. Jesus maintained constant communication with what you might call a galactic council, gatherings of evolved consciousnesses from multiple civilizations who coordinate assistance for developing planets. When your scriptures mention him going into the wilderness to pray, he was engaging in telepathic conferences, receiving guidance on how to teach beings who had very limited understanding of consciousness technology. The beings who helped him, were they like you? Some were. Others existed in pure energy states, no longer requiring physical form. When your Bible mentions angels, it is often describing these higher dimensional assistants. The resurrection was not Jesus returning from death in the way you understand it. It was a planned demonstration of consciousness continuity, showing that awareness transcends physical form. This is the teaching that will transform your life, Frank. When Jesus taught love one another, he was providing precise technical instruction for activating the most powerful force in creation. Love is not emotion, it is fundamental energetic frequency maintaining all existence. Zeal's eyes seemed to glow brighter. At the cellular level, genuine love frequency generates electromagnetic fields measurable by your instruments. These fields automatically promote healing, accelerate regeneration, optimize all biological functions. At the manifestation level, love frequency is the carrier wave for all creation. When you operate from this frequency, you align with the creative force of the universe itself. Reality rearranges to match your vibration. But I loved Margaret. I loved her completely, and she still left. You were attached to Margaret. You were dependent on her presence for your happiness. This is not love frequency. This is need, which is a contraction based in fear of loss. True love frequency is expansion, is giving without requirement of return, is operating from fullness rather than emptiness. Jesus loved everyone the same, lepers, prostitutes, Pharisees, Romans, because his love was generated internally, not as response to others' worthiness. For your entire life, you have been praying incorrectly, Zeal said gently. Prayer based on supplication reinforces separation and powerlessness. Jesus' method was completely different. How did he pray? He gave thanks before manifestations appeared. At Lazarus' tomb, he thanked God before Lazarus emerged. At the multiplication of loaves, he gave thanks before the food multiplied. This is because he understood that on energetic level, all creations are instantaneous. Physical reality just needs time to catch up with energetic reality. Zeal taught me the correct method. Feel as if you have already received. If you want health, generate feelings of gratitude for perfect health as if it already exists. Your body cannot distinguish between actual experience and vividly imagined experience. Emotion is the power source. Thought is the direction. Release attachment to how manifestation occurs. Universe has infinite pathways you cannot imagine. After Jesus' death, those who understood his true teachings were systematically suppressed. The church leadership transformed empowerment philosophy into control mechanism, not from malice, but from their own fear. Fear that if people understood their own divine nature, institutional authority would become unnecessary. What was changed? Kingdom of God is within you became kingdom is distant heaven. You will do greater works became only Jesus could do miracles. You are sons of God became you are wretched sinners. Love is the law became obedience is the law. The church built an empire on keeping humanity ignorant of their own divine nature. You are living in the era Jesus anticipated when he spoke of his return. His return is not him coming from the sky. It is collective awakening of Christ consciousness within humanity. Millions of individuals simultaneously remembering their divine nature. Why now? Because humanity has reached critical development threshold. You have technology that could destroy your planet or elevate your species. You have global communication allowing rapid consciousness evolution. You have enough individuals awakening that resonance effect is beginning. One awakened person makes it easier for the next, who makes it easier for the next. The next 20 years will determine whether humanity joins galactic community or repeats the cycle of collapse that has occurred on this planet multiple times before. You were not chosen randomly. Your pain broke you open. Your loneliness made you receptive. Your questions created space for answers. You are early awakener, seed that sprouted before general flowering. Your function is to demonstrate through lived example that awakened consciousness produces transformed life. Others will notice. They will ask. You will teach, not through preaching, but through being. I'm nobody. Who would listen to me? Jesus chose fishermen. Consciousness transformation does not require credentials. It requires authenticity. Your ordinariness is your qualification, Frank. You are exactly who can reach exactly who needs to hear these truths. The physical universe is a multidimensional school designed to accelerate consciousness evolution through the experience of separation and limitation. You chose to incarnate here to learn specific lessons, including the lesson of losing Margaret. I chose this pain? Before birth, your consciousness reviewed life options and selected circumstances offering optimal growth. Every challenge, especially difficult ones, is curriculum you designed for yourself. Margaret leaving was not punishment or random tragedy. It was the exact experience required to break open your heart and make you ready for these teachings. What about after I die? Physical death is a transition to the next level. Consciousness continues, reviews life experiences, integrates lessons, and chooses next incarnation or dimension. The you that is aware right now, the witness behind your thoughts, has always existed and will always exist. You are eternal consciousness having temporary physical experience.
I sat in silence, feeling the weight and wonder of these teachings. Everything I thought I knew had been incomplete. Not wrong exactly, but missing so much that the picture had been unrecognizable. The loneliness you've felt since Margaret left, Zale said softly, has not been absence of love. It has been absence of connection to Source. You made Margaret your source. When she left, you felt disconnected from love itself. but the connection has always been there, waiting for you to access it directly. That is what I am teaching you, how to generate love internally, how to operate from wholeness, how to become what Jesus came to show humanity they could become. And what's that? Awake, empowered, free, operating from consciousness of unity rather than separation, healing rather than wounded, creating rather than victimized. This is Christ consciousness, not worshiping Jesus, but embodying what he embodied. For the first time in 3 months, I felt something other than pain in my chest. I felt hope.
On the 5th night, I sat in my living room, Margaret's paintings still on the walls, and felt something shift. The resistance stopped. The mental arguments ceased. I could no longer deny what I'd experienced. "I believe you," I said aloud to the empty room. "It's real, all of it." The tears came then. Not grief this time, but relief. A dam breaking after months of pressure. All the years of feeling powerless, abandoned, inadequate, all based on misunderstanding. I wasn't broken. I'd just never been taught how to access what was always there. I sobbed until I had no tears left, and when I finished, I felt lighter than I had in months. The next morning, I tried Zail's method. Instead of praying, "Please take away my loneliness," I spent 10 minutes feeling gratitude for deep connection, as if it already existed, feeling thankful for love, for purpose, for joy. By afternoon, 3 different customers had stopped to chat longer than usual. Mrs. Patterson invited me to Sunday dinner. Tom Bradley, who I'd known for 20 years but barely spoke to, asked if I wanted to go fishing. Small things, but noticeable. I began seeing energy fields around people, subtle colors and movements I'd never noticed before. I could sense customers' emotional states as they walked in. I knew which products they needed before they asked. The world looked the same, but I was perceiving layers I'd been blind to my entire life. My chronic knee pain decreased by half in 1 week. The tension headaches stopped completely. I was sleeping better. Deep, restorative sleep with vivid dreams that felt instructive. A customer paid off a 2-year debt I'd written off. Another mentioned a management position opening at the regional office. Better pay, more responsibility. I wasn't doing anything differently externally, but internally, everything had shifted. I stopped begging and started thanking. Instead of, "Please God, help me be okay," I practiced, "Thank you for perfect health. Thank you for abundance. Thank you for loving connections. Thank you for divine guidance." The difference was immediate. I felt empowered instead of powerless, full instead of empty. Looking in the mirror one morning, I barely recognized myself. Not because my appearance had changed, though I did look younger somehow, less burdened, but because I saw myself differently. I'm not Frank Morrison, failed husband, small-town nobody. I'm eternal consciousness having a temporary physical experience. I'm a divine spark of creator, here to learn and grow and demonstrate love. It sounded crazy, but it felt true. On the 7th night, Zail prepared to leave. His ship was repaired, his injuries healed. "You no longer need me," he transmitted. "You have direct connection to same consciousness that guided Jesus. Trust your inner knowing. Live these truths. Your transformation will inspire others without you speaking a word about aliens or cosmic councils. Simply be the change. That is enough." "Thank you," I said, and meant it more than I'd ever meant anything. After Zail left, I stood in my storage room, where this impossible journey had begun, and made a vow. I'm going back to my work as a cashier, But I'm not the same person anymore. I'm a healer now. Every customer, every conversation is an opportunity to channel love frequency, to facilitate awakening, to demonstrate what Jesus taught. I wouldn't preach, wouldn't tell anyone about Zael unless specifically asked. But I would live these truths so consistently, so authentically, that people couldn't help but notice something different. And when they asked, and they would ask, I'd be ready to share. For the first time since Margaret left, I felt truly alive. The changes were undeniable. Morrison's market felt different, not physically, but energetically. Customers lingered longer, chatted more openly. The store became the community gathering place it had been in my grandfather's time. Helen Mercer started playing piano again. Impromptu concerts at the senior center that drew crowds. She told everyone about her miraculous healing, though she didn't know I'd had anything to do with it. Pastor Williams stopped by one afternoon, buying coffee and apparently trying to work up courage to say something. "Frank, I've been meaning to ask." He hesitated. "You seem different, lighter somehow. Have you been attending services elsewhere?" "No, Pastor, just learning to pray differently." "Differently how?" I showed him, briefly, the practice of gratitude instead of supplication, of feeling wholeness rather than lack. He listened, skeptical but curious. "That's not exactly orthodox," he said carefully. "No, but it works. And isn't that what matters? Results." He had no answer, but 2 Sundays later, his sermon was about experiencing God's presence rather than just believing in it. Small shift, but noticeable. Margaret called in February. Her voice on the phone sent a spike of something through me. Not quite pain anymore, more like an old scar being touched. "Frank, I heard you're doing well. People in town are talking about how much you've changed." "I have changed. I'm learning who I really am." "I'm glad." She paused. "Frank, I'm sorry I hurt you. I thought leaving was the only way to find myself, but—" "Margaret," I interrupted gently, "you don't need to apologize. Your leaving was the best thing that could have happened to me. It broke me open. It forced me to find what I'd been looking for in all the wrong places." "What were you looking for?" "Love, connection, purpose. I thought you provided those things, but they were always inside me. You leaving taught me that." She was quiet for a long moment. "You really have changed." "Yes. And I hope you find what you're looking for too." We didn't reconcile. Didn't need to. She was on her path, I was on mine, and both were exactly right. By spring, 3 people had asked me directly, "Frank, what happened to you? You seem like a completely different person." To each, I shared what I could without mentioning aliens or cosmic councils, just the principles. That love is energy we generate, not something we extract from others. That prayer works through gratitude, not begging. That Jesus came to demonstrate human potential, not to be worshipped from afar. 2 of the 3 started experimenting with the practices. One, Sarah Chen, experienced remarkable healing from chronic migraines. She asked if I'd teach a small group. And so, in my living room, under Margaret's paintings, which I'd finally stopped seeing as shrines to failure, I began teaching what Zael had taught me. Not church services, consciousness development circles. 5 people at first, then 8, then 12. We practiced together, experimented together, shared results. I didn't call it religion.
called it technology. Practical application of principles that anyone could test and verify. The loneliness that had consumed me was gone. Not because I'd found someone to fill Margaret's place, but because I'd learned to generate connection from within. The ache in my chest had transformed into warmth that radiated outward. I was 48 years old, and for the first time in my life, I understood what Jesus had really been teaching. And I was finally, truly awake.
Frank Morrison's journey reveals something you may have suspected but never had courage to fully embrace. The love you're desperately seeking from other people exists within you, waiting to be activated. For how many years have you been praying for God to send someone to love you, to fix your loneliness, to fill the empty spaces that ache in the middle of the night? How long have you believed that your worth depends on another person choosing you? This is the lie that keeps you imprisoned. The truth Jesus came to demonstrate and that religion obscured, is that you were not incomplete. You were not half of something waiting for the other half. You are whole, divine, and infinitely connected to the source of all love. When Jesus said, "Love one another as I have loved you," he wasn't telling you to be nice to people. He was providing technical instruction for generating love frequency that heals bodies, manifests circumstances, and transforms reality itself. Margaret didn't take Frank's love with her when she left. She simply stopped triggering his ability to access the love that was always within him. And when he learned to generate that frequency himself, not dependent on any person's presence or absence, he became more powerful than he'd ever imagined possible. The same capability exists in you, right now, this moment. You can continue praying the old way, begging God to send someone to love you, to fix your loneliness, to fill the empty spaces that ache in the middle of the night. How long have you believed that your worth depends on another person choosing you? This is the lie that keeps you imprisoned. The truth Jesus came to demonstrate and that religion obscured, is that you are not incomplete. You are not half of something waiting for the other half. You are whole, divine, and infinitely connected to the source of all love. When Jesus said, "Love one another as I have loved you," he wasn't telling you to be nice to people. He was providing technical instruction for generating love frequency that heals bodies, manifests circumstances, and transforms reality itself. Margaret didn't take Frank's love with her when she left. She simply stopped triggering his ability to access the love that was always within him. And when he learned to generate that frequency himself, not dependent on any person's presence or absence, he became more powerful than he'd ever imagined possible. The same capability exists in you, right now, this moment. You can continue praying the old way, begging God to send someone to love you, to fix your loneliness, to make your life meaningful. You can keep believing that happiness comes from external sources, that you're powerless to change how you feel. That's safe, familiar, what you've been taught. Or you can do what Frank did. You can start generating love frequency yourself. You can pray through gratitude instead of lack. You can activate the Christ consciousness that Jesus came to show you exists in every human being. Leave a comment below and tell me, have you ever felt that your prayers went unanswered because you were praying from lack instead of wholeness? Have you experienced love as something you generate rather than something you extract from others? Have you noticed that your thoughts and emotions shape your reality? Share your story. You're not alone in these experiences. Thousands of others are awakening to the same truths. If you want more testimonies like Frank's, stories that challenge everything you thought you knew about Jesus, love, and human potential, subscribe to Stories of Light and activate the bell. Because Frank isn't the only one who has been taught these truths by beings beyond our understanding. There are more stories, more witnesses, more evidence that everything religion taught you was incomplete. Remember, Jesus' return is not him descending from clouds to save you. Jesus' return is you awakening to the Christ consciousness that has always existed within you. You are not waiting to be saved. You are remembering that you were never lost.